Hello, friends. This is the Netarts Friends Church podcast. We are Jesus people, Kingdom of God people, welcoming, yearning, sharing. And we're glad you're connecting here with us. We'd love to connect in person as well. If you're inclined to support this podcast or for more information, just hop on over to netartsfriends.org. That's netartsfriends.org. Let's jump into today's sermon. Luke 18, 9 through 14. Jesus then addressed this parable to those who were convinced of their own righteousness and despised everyone else. Two people went up to the temple area to pray. One was a Pharisee and the other was a tax collector. The Pharisee took up his position and spoke this prayer to himself. O God, I thank you that I am not like the rest of humanity, greedy, dishonest, adulterous, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week and I pay tithes on my whole income. But the tax collector stood off at a distance and would not even raise his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast and prayed, O God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, the latter, the tax collector, went home justified, not the former, the Pharisee. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and the one who humbles himself will be exalted. I love this parable, and this is not the first time that I've preached a sermon on this parable. And even though I have preached sermons on this parable before, for some weird reason this past week, I was really struggling to connect emotionally with this parable. I spent a lot of time in the figure it out space of my mind. There was a lot of thinking and reading and note-taking, and it was like I was wrestling with something, and for quite a while, I couldn't figure out what I was wrestling with. And then when I finally slowed down, when I finally stilled myself and all of my flailing around, I sensed the Spirit pointing at something. In the midst of all of my wrestling and thinking and study and note-taking, I was distancing myself from both characters. I found that I could imagine a Pharisee character. I could imagine a character who was certain that he had it right. Someone intent on winning everyone else over to their way of thinking, dead set on persuading everyone that they knew the right answer. They knew the right way to keep God's commands. I could imagine that character. I could imagine them as a villain, like a self-righteous, greedy, religious hypocrite who gobbled up widows' houses and placed unbearable rules on others. I could imagine that Pharisee character in a more generous way, as one of the most sincerely religious people of their day, someone devoted to study, discussion, interpretation, obedience of God's law. I could imagine that character. And I could even bring that Pharisee character with me into the 21st century and think about various kinds of people in our day who act like Pharisees, bringing all of their religious sincerity and certainty that they're right, yet harming and excluding vulnerable people. I could do all of that stuff in a cognitive space in my mind, but that character was nothing like me. This is the picture that I could not imagine. Sorry about the bad Photoshop. I couldn't imagine that Pharisee as a character who was me. In the same way, I could also imagine a tax collector, and I could imagine a person who had stooped to the lowest of lows, someone who participated in harming others, and no one trusted them, everyone hated them. I could imagine that tax collector character as a villain, as someone who just didn't care if a get rich quick scheme hurt their neighbors. I could bring that image into the 21st century and think about people who are the face of corrupt and oppressive systems in our day, people who work for the empire and participate in turning the lives of vulnerable folks upside down. I could also find the part of my imagination that was much more compassionate towards the tax collector and understand that this is a story about a tax collector, not a chief tax collector. So I could recognize that there's a big difference between those two characters. A tax collector may be the face of the corrupt operation, but most often they weren't the ones getting rich, because many tax collectors in the ancient world were people who couldn't find other work. They were simply trying to survive. They were like cogs in an evil machine. So I could bring all of those thoughts into the 21st century and think about the kinds of people in our world who are treated like a walking virus and no one trusts them and everyone hates them, but they're just trying to survive. I could imagine that tax collector person in the story, but once again, that character was nothing like me. Sorry for the bad Photoshop once again. I realized that I really would rather not see myself as either character. I don't want to be the Pharisee in this story. I don't want to be the tax collector in this story. And so that's what was going on with me. There I sat, struggling to connect with the parable, even though I love the story. And as I sat there with this parable, I sensed the Spirit saying something to me. Both characters are pictures of different parts of who you are. Every part of this story happens inside of you. The two different characters are just different sides of the same coin. They're pictures of different parts of who you are. Everything happening with the Pharisee happens within parts of you. Everything happening with the tax collector happens within parts of you. You have all kinds of ache in your life and all kinds of ache for the divine, and you're trying to solve all that ache with all kinds of attempted solutions. And these two different characters are just different parts of that ache and different attempted solutions. Now, it could be that I'm the only one with both the Pharisee and the tax collector dynamics going on inside of me, but I suspect that isn't the case. And so I want to invite you into a meditation, into an exploration, call it a prayer exercise, to connect with the Pharisee parts of yourself, with the tax collector parts of yourself, to see what Jesus might want to offer to you. So, here we go. I invite you to, wherever you are, just get settled in, to relax, to let down your defenses, take a deep breath, let out a slow exhale. Start noticing. Notice that the Pharisee prays to himself. That's the meaning of that Greek word. He's praying to himself. What is that part of you that feels this chronic need to impress? To name the ways that you are going above and beyond others. What is that part that pushes everything good about you into the limelight and pushes all the struggle and all of the ache off into some dark, hidden corner? What is that need to compare yourself to others? To say, I am at a higher level than them. I am better than them. What is that part that wants to distance yourself and distinguish yourself from others and tell yourself that you are nothing like those people? You don't want to need any help or any fixing. What is that part that wants to be the person that other people look to and other people emulate and other people need? In all of that striving, the question is, who are you actually trying to convince and persuade that you are getting it right? Why do you need to be certain that you're getting it right? Are you trying to convince the crowds, people around you? Is it mom? Is it dad? Is it someone in your past? Is it God? Who are you trying to convince that you're getting it right? And why does Jesus tell us that the Pharisee was praying to himself? Is the person that you're actually trying to convince at the bottom of it all, is it actually you? When we're struggling with this internal problem of, I want to be certain that I'm getting it right. This is a story Jesus tells to those who are convinced of their own righteousness, or they want to be at least. When we are struggling with that, our way of seeking an external solution to an internal problem, it's sometimes just to start naming the errors of others. Like, I am not like those other people because and fill in the blank. They're lazy, they're gross, they're twisted, they're dumb, they're weak, they're mean, they're needy, they're aggressive, they're wrong. Like, keep going with your list. Somehow we think, well, if we can name the errors of others, that must mean that we have the truth, that we're right. Our Pharisee parts definitely can put on a good show. They know how to put their best foot forward. They aim to please and impress. But underneath all of that, there's a deeper question. What is that Pharisee guarding? What does that Pharisee part not want to bring out into the open? I'll give you a moment to sit with that question. Are any of you familiar with the 12-step program? I invite you to listen to these. This is just the first 8 steps. And just ask yourself if the Pharisee in this story did any of these steps. So here are the steps. First of all, we admitted that we were powerless over, you could fill in anything here, any attempted solution. We were powerless over it, and that our lives had become unmanageable. We came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. We made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. We made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. We admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. we were entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. We humbly asked Him to remove our shortcomings. We made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. And that's just 8 of the steps. We could go on. The Pharisee part of me and the Pharisee part of you doesn't want to do any of those steps. You dearly want God in your life. You ache for that connection with the divine. You want to go to the temple to pray, as it were. That's what Jesus says. There's these 2 characters that go to the temple to pray. But hearing steps like this make the Pharisee part of you want to throw up. It's like, oh my goodness, that is way too vulnerable. You can see how steps like this might be good for someone else. Someone who might get labeled as defective and a screw up, an addict, a less than, one of those struggling types, whatever that means to you. But you say, like, I don't need those steps. Thank God, or thank me, that I'm not like them, because I don't want a label like that. The Pharisee part of you says, steps like that, they're just for addicts. They're just for messed up people. Every society has hierarchies of sin. There are gross sins that'll get you slapped with a label and ostracized before you know it. And then there are socially respectable sins that no one mentions, no one talks about. Psychiatrist and theologian Gerald May says this. He says, to be alive is to be addicted, and to be alive and addicted is to stand in the need of grace. So once again, that question, what's that Pharisee guarding? To put it differently, and we all know this, if the human brain is built on routines and rhythms and coping skills, and we all have these unhealthy ways of navigating life, stuck patterns where it's like, man, we're handling life in the same way, in ways that aren't working. We're hoping for different results. We're trying to find an external solution to an internal problem. It's underneath all that, what is that Pharisee guarding or hiding, not bringing out into the open? Are you able to connect with that Pharisee part within yourself? Okay. We'll let the Pharisee part take a little break, and we'll look across the room at our tax collector parts of ourselves. Do you know the experience where you show up at a church service or a worship gathering or a get-together with friends, and there's this voice inside of your head that says, I'm the only one here as messed up as me. Like, if they had any idea, they would never invite me again. All these other people have their life put together, but I'm a mess. It's the voice of shame. It's the part of you that self-isolates because you believe that if anyone actually saw you, they wouldn't want you. That you're somehow worse than all these people. It's the part of you that knows the exact nature of your wrongs and you're plagued by them. It's that part of you that you see real memories and real faces, real events, real ways that you screwed up. You harmed other people. You betrayed yourself. You know you weren't true to God. You You tried to find an external solution to an internal problem. In the process, whatever it is, it's like, man, I violated myself. I violated people around me. You did things that you wish you could take back. And so this part of you knows this feeling of aching for that connection with God, but also feeling like you really shouldn't even be praying. Like just this unworthy feeling, like you're the only one here as defective as you. That's that tax collector part, praying over in the corner like I'm not supposed to be here. And it's also the voice, that part, it's the voice of hopelessness. There's no way to fix this. That's the feeling. In the ancient world, tax collectors were considered beyond repentance because there was no way that they could pay back what they had extorted for their boss, the chief tax collector. Just to give a little history here, restitution required paying back everything extorted plus 1/5. So how in the world could a toll collector ever hope to find all the travelers and merchants that had passed by their toll booth if they've been involved with a toll booth as a tax collector at all? But even more than that, how are you supposed to pay back a fortune when you're not the chief tax collector, when you are earning below minimum wage and you're just this small cog in a large corrupt machine? How are you supposed to pay back money that you handed over to your boss? Oh, and repentance required toll collectors, tax collectors, to quit their job. So what alternative do they have? Because these are people who often became a tax collector because they couldn't find other work. So they betrayed their community and some part of who they were because they couldn't see their way. They couldn't find another alternative. So it feels like, man, there's no way to fix this. This connection with God and with the worshiping community, it feels impossible. Like there's no way out of this life that I'm stuck in. Do you know that feeling? Feeling like there's no way to dig out of this situation. I'm in too deep. Do you know that feeling of just hating the situation that you're in, but you can't see a clear path to a different life? And it's that part of you that feels like you'll never live up to your critics. You'll never live up to yourself. You're just stuck here. So I'm going to just pause and let you connect with that part, your tax collector parts. In ancient Palestine, a lamb was sacrificed at the temple twice a day, 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. in Jerusalem. There was a set ritual to it all. The service began outside of the sanctuary in the courtyard in front of the great high altar. The lamb was sacrificed, smoke, the smell of meat filling the air, set prayers, the reading of the Psalms, the choir would sing, lamps were trimmed, incense was offered, blood was splashed on the sides of the altar, a sound of silver trumpets, the clash of cymbals. And at one point in the service, the priest would leave the outer courtyard and disappear inside the building to offer incense. And at that point, everyone was expected to offer their prayers out loud while they waited for the priest to come back out and offer the priestly benediction. So the tax collector, the prayers in this story are out loud prayers. The tax collector had to endure the Pharisee beating him up with his public prayer, basically shaming him. Thank you, God, that I'm not like that filthy tax collector. And all the tax collector could do was hang his head and beat his chest, which is, in that ancient world, it's something Jewish men only did when they were in anguish. And I love theologian Ken Bailey's interpretation of this prayer. Oh God, let it be for me. Let the mercy be for me. The priest came out. He announced that Israel's sins were washed away. There were more trumpets, incense, choir, and eventually everyone went home. Was it for the tax collector? Or had the tax collector just embarrassed himself in front of everyone? So I made it this far, sitting there in my meditation, trying to figure out what all this means. And once again, I felt like the Spirit was inviting me to notice something about the relationship, the posture between the Pharisee and the tax collector. They're a picture of the tension playing out inside of me and inside of you. I noticed that our Pharisee parts and our tax collector parts actually both stand at a distance. Neither of them have come home. They both stand removed for different reasons. One part knows and can fully admit, I can't fix me. That's that tax collector part. There's a part of you that knows, I have stuck patterns. I'm trying to solve things in ways that aren't working. And so there's a part of you that just wants to cry out in desperation and brutal honesty and confession and say, help. But that part also feels unworthy and unwanted and ashamed. And then that other part, the Pharisee part, doesn't even want to need fixing. It's like, why can't we just say that it's all good and I'm good and everything's fine and I can do it and I've got this? And that Pharisee part of you beats the tax collector part of you up with scorn and with shame, and that tax collector part stands farther and farther away and hangs its head. And can you feel all this within yourself? That Pharisee only wants the labels of good and righteous and clean and successful, and that tax collector only believes the labels of bad and unrighteous and dirty and failure. And they're both standing at a distance from one another, and they're aching for God and for that sense of home and to know they're getting it right. Do you know this feeling? And if you can just label everything, good, bad, success, failure, righteous, unrighteous, black, white, clean, unclean, if you can just come up with enough labels, enough bad things to say about other people and good things to say about yourself, maybe you can relieve that chronic need for certainty. Because that's what's underneath it all. Jesus is telling this story to people who have this chronic need for certainty, and so then they're despising others. And maybe if you can get all the labeling just right, then you can be certain you're getting it right, and then you can come home to yourself and be justified, which means to be declared that you are as you ought to be. And along comes Jesus. Jesus does something different. Notice the final words of the passage. Everyone who exalts himself will be humbled. The one who humbles himself will be exalted. Jesus reframes the categories from righteous and unrighteous to humble and proud. And it's not just this story where Jesus does this. Jesus does this over and over in the Gospels. It's not a question of sinner or not sinner. We're all sinners. It's a question of humble or proud. There are humble addicts. There are humble sinners who are facing their stuck patterns, their attempts to cope in ways that aren't working. And then there are proud addicts, there are proud sinners who just really don't want to talk about it. So I want to invite you, if you're able, to turn both of those parts of you simply to listen to Jesus. Is there something that Jesus has to say to these parts of who you are? What does Jesus have to say to that Pharisee within you who is an achiever and is guarded and for some reason is struggling to feel safe enough to take any steps towards the middle, towards the light, towards the tax collector? I'm going to just give some silence here. Is there something Jesus has to say to that part of you? What does Jesus have to say to that tax collector part of you? That part that feels defective and ashamed about the ways you haven't been true to yourself, to humanity, to God? What does Jesus want to say to that part of you? Is there something that tax collector part of you needs to hear from the Pharisee part of you? Is there something that the Pharisee needs to hear from the tax collector part of you? What would it look like for Jesus to free those parts to come home to one another? We ended our Sunday gathering after our listening time to Jesus with a discussion question. So I'll share that with you in closing as something you can chat about with your friends or reflect on. How does the humble you navigate differently than the proud you in your prayer life, in your self-talk, in your work life, in your home and family life, in your community, church, social life? Thank you for joining us for a Sunday sermon from Netart's Friends Church. We hope you'll join us soon for one of our in-person worship gatherings. For more information, hop on over to netartsfriends.org. God's peace be with you, friends.